And we are live! Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the bigger picture. Hey, we've got our live virtual studio audience on Zoom, ready to hear the last class of Sefer Bereshit. So the next series we have will be on the Book of Shemot. So that is extremely exciting. So we all have to be very, very proud of ourselves. This is our 30th class together. And we're going to be looking at Vayechi, the last parsha in the Book of Bereshit, and trying to wrap a few things up and trying to share some wonderful ideas. So hopefully everyone can see the slideshow on the screen over there, and hopefully it's somewhat clear. And let's get ourselves underway, shall we, with the final class, Parshat Vayechi, talking about the end of days. Let's just think a little bit back to what we spoke about last week. We were talking about Vayigash. And we spoke about Joseph being able to see the bigger picture. And that had meant that he was the one who had to bring about the teshuvah process that his brothers needed to go through. And he needed to orchestrate events so that the brothers are in a situation where they have to ask themselves, what will they do when there is another child of Rachel, whose life is on the line? Because that's what happened with Yosef. Yosef had been this brother who had dreamt, who had annoyed them, who had frustrated them. And as a result of that, it had been Yehuda who had ended up orchestrating the sale of Yosef down into Egypt. He had brought that particular part of it about. And now, as Binyamin's life is on the line, it's Yehuda who is the one who steps forward to save his brother's life, reversing the decision that he had made with Yosef all of those years ago. And so we talked about how the brothers finally reunite and then they reunite, and then the family, the whole mishpacha, the ganze mishpacha, moves down to Egypt. Yaakov follows them as well. They settle in Egypt, and then Parshat Vayechi picks up with basically the end of Yaakov's life. I don't know if anybody had the chance to flick through Parshat Vayechi, but that's what we're going to try and focus on this evening, right? Yaakov's death and the things that happen at the end of Yaakov's life, bringing to a close the book of Bereshit. Now, we have mentioned on several occasions that the book of Bereshit represents Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim. And hopefully by now, if I've done my job correctly, are people still able to hear me, by the way, because you've frozen on one of my screens? Am I clear? Yeah. Okay. You've completely frozen on the other computer, which I use to track your faces. Okay. So Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, we've talked about that on several occasions. It is the concept that the things that happen in the book of Bereshit are actually going to manifest themselves over and over again throughout history. So the actions of our forefathers are kind of prototypes or archetypal things that they do, which permeate throughout history in different ways. So if Bereshit is the beginning of time, the beginning of human history, then Vayechi is going to represent the end of days, the end of human history. And let's then try and consider some of the things that we learn about, that we see in the flow of the story of Parshat Vayechi. In Parshat Vayechi, we encounter Yaakov's death, and we wrap up the story with the 12 tribes. And towards the beginning of the parsha, Yaakov gathers everybody together. Chapter 49, verse 1. How is it looking on the screen? Is it looking pretty clear?
I've got the presentation.
Okay. Hopefully it's somewhat clear. Chapter 49, verse 1. Vayikra Yaakov el banav, vayomer he'asfu, va'agida lachem et asher yikra etchem ba'acharit hayamim. Yaakov gathers everybody around and he says, gather together and I will tell you what will happen at the end of days. He is ready to reveal all. And sorry, I'm just making sure I had the right verse there. So he's ready to reveal all. Tell everyone what's going to happen with the end of days. Tell everyone what's going to happen with Mashiach. But what happens? Does he do that? What does he say? He doesn't. He doesn't tell them about the end of days. He doesn't reveal it. And instead, he blesses each tribe and gives them a unique and custom-made blessing aimed at each of the 12 tribes. Now, we should feel a little bit gypped by that. The story could have ended so differently. He could have told us, yeah, well, in the year 2023, there's going to be a big war somewhere, and something's going to happen, and Mashiach's going to come, and he's going to save everybody, and everyone's going to get on Stella and Lawrence's flight tomorrow and join them in Israel, and we're all going to live happily. We don't get that. We don't get anything about the end of days. He says, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to do it. Gather yourselves and listen, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. What's he going to say? Tell me about the end of days. And then he doesn't. He talks about the tribes. He gives them blessings. He analyzes their character in some instances. What went on? So the Gemara fleshes out the story for us a little bit. It's quite a long Gemara, but it's quite interesting to see. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Vayikra Yaakov el banav vayomer he'asvu va'agid alachem. The verse that we've just quoted, that Yaakov called his sons and said, gather around, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Says the Gemara, Bikesh Yaakov legalot lebanav ketz hayamin. Yaakov wanted to reveal to his sons. By the way, is it coming out clearly at all on the screen? Are we able to see this a little bit? Well, that's good news. Excellent. So he says, Yaakov wanted, Bikesh, he wanted to reveal to his sons, Ketz Hayamin, what was going to happen at the end of days. Not just Ketz Hayamin, but Ketz Hayamin, the end of days. The Nistal Kamimenu Shechina. At that point, the Shechina abandoned him. And that meant that he wasn't able to give over his prophecy. Omar, says Yaakov, Shema chas v'shalom yesh b'mitasi pasul or psul. Maybe one of my tribes, one of my descendants is pasul, is unfit, and that is why I'm losing the capacity to be able to share this information. Ke Avraham sheyatsa mimenu Yishmael. Maybe something's gone wrong, right? Remember the plan. The plan was we were going to have 12 tribes. Those were going to be the building blocks of the Jewish people. And so they all have to be in good order, right? Maybe I've blown it. Maybe I've got one of my sons who's like Yishmael, just like Abraham had a child. He had two children, Yishmael and Yitzchak. One of them was able to transmit the heritage and the transmission and the chain, and one of them wasn't. Maybe I'm like Abraham, who had Yishmael. Maybe I'm like Yitzchak, who's produced an Esav, right? I was the lucky one. I was the one who was able to continue the transmission, but maybe I've got a son who's ended up like Esav, and I just don't realize it. Don't forget, Yitzchak as well was swayed by Esav and thought that he was a tzaddik. Maybe I've made the same mistake. Amru lo banav, his son said back to him, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. They all responded with that famous pasuk, Hear O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is one. Amru, they said, Keshem she'ein b'libecha ela echad, in the same way that in your heart there is only one God, kach ein b'libeinu ela echad. So too in our hearts there is only one God. Don't worry, we're all from. We're all on the derech. Right? And at that time he opened up his mouth and said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever, as he realized that indeed his sons were all righteous. Just like there is only one HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Yaakov's heart, so too they know what they're doing. They're on the right track. They're focused on the correct goals here. Nothing to worry about. But that, my friends, leaves us with two questions. Question number one it leaves us to is, well, what happened to revealing the end of days then? Right? If there was no blemish, then why did he not reveal the end of days? Why did he end up giving brachot? And secondly, why was the Shema the answer to the question? Everyone knows the Shema. You don't have to be particularly religious to know the Shema. Someone told me today that before they play every tennis match, they always say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He barely knows any Hebrew, but he knows Shema. How is that proof? So we've got two really strong questions there, right? If there was no problem with the brothers, then why did he not reveal the end of days? Why was the prophecy taken away from him? And if they were all good, how is that the proof to be able to say the line of Shema? They'd have been singing Shema ever since they were babies. It doesn't take a lot to be able to say Shema. So let's delve a little deeper. We have to understand what was Yaakov nervous about with the Shvatim, to the point that it shifts the whole parsha, the whole storyline completely changes. And what is the resolution that occurs that allows us to wrap up the whole of Sefer Bereshit? Because there must be some kind of resolution that gets reached, otherwise the book would not end, because the book is about building the Jewish nation before it then enters into the era of slavery in Egypt. So the structure of 12 tribes is a very important structure. The idea of 12 revolving around a 13th center point is something that resurfaces in other places, and it's representative and it's indicative of the 12 brothers surrounding Yaakov, that 13th center point. And it somewhat models the 12 tribes encamped around a different 13th in the middle, and that is the 13th with the way in which the encampment was set up. And you can kind of see it here on the picture on the screen. It's a bit fuzzy and grainy on my screen as well, don't worry. But we had 12 tribes encamped around the tribe of Levi in the middle. So there were 3 tribes in every direction, and the tribe of Levi were in the middle. Oh, so how are we working this one out? Let's not forget that the tribe of Joseph gets split into 2. You have Ephraim and Manasseh. They become the 12 tribes that are surrounding the Mishkan. And then around the Mishkan in the middle, as you can see, somewhat depicted, are the tents of the tribe of Levi. Now, what's happening is, at the end of Yaakov's life, is that the center is breaking itself up into branches. As Yaakov leaves from this world, he is leaving behind 12 tribes. And he needs to make sure that all those 12 tribes are capable of continuing the message and continuing what needs to happen for the Jewish people. So the center is fine. The root is fine. Yaakov is fine. We know he is fine because we learned together in chapter 33, verse 18, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem, that Yaakov arrived Shalem in the city of Shechem. Right? So we know he has achieved what he needed to achieve. But if you recall, we said at the time, it was the Shvatim, it was the tribes who were not complete yet. And it's a tricky journey to navigate because on the one hand, they are parts. They are pieces of a puzzle. A piece, a part can never be shalem. And we talked at the time about all the hatred and all of the jealousy that was coming out of the brothers. And we talked as well about how when different parts are conflicting with each other and they don't realize that each part has its own unique function and is unwilling to harmonize with another part, that is where the problem begins. I hope we can somewhat remember learning about that when we started learning about Joseph and his brothers. right? So the core, the root of everything, the center of everything, Yaakov, he is Shalem. But we needed to be seeing that the 12 parts, the 12 pieces of the Jewish people could also reach a point of some kind of completion. And we had identified that when apart, things that they should be the whole, then we have a problem. But when I am part of a greater system, I can't think that I should be bigger than the system. It's the wrong perspective to have. Everybody has their own unique place, their own unique role, their own unique function. And there's a breakdown that occurs when one starts to encroach upon what the other is doing, or thinks that something that the other is doing should be what they are doing. We have to learn to harmonize. If you remember, we spoke about the opening couple of chapters of the book of Bereshit, that chapter 1 provided us a general overview of the world. It was very brief in the way that it describes creation. Chapter 2 revisits creation and revisits it from a subjective perspective. And once we started to see things from a subjective perspective, then we saw how damaging it can be. So hatred and jealousy prevented the parts, the tribes, the brothers from working harmoniously as one. But when I accept my share in the world, as well as the shares and the responsibilities of all others, and I can get past all of that, then the world can reach its ultimate tikkun. Then it can reach its shleimut, its completion. We have to understand that everyone has to play their part. Everyone has to play their role. And that is what is happening at the end of Bereshit, at the end of the book of Bereshit. Yaakov is shalem. Yaakov is complete. But the damage is his yerech. His damage is his thigh that we talked about. It's the children. It was the offspring. It was the next generation that were the problem. Are they going to be able to get past their hatred and jealousy and tap into their own unique kochot and harmonize together? And that is why Yaakov's response is appropriate to the question of the end of days, because the only way we can get to the end of days is if we understand our roles in life. So he goes through each tribe and tells them what they need to aspire to in order to help everyone reach the end of days. That's what the vision of the end of days looks like, when everyone is united, when everyone is doing what they're supposed to do. And whether it's him identifying one of his son's character traits, or whether it's identifying what it is that's going to unlock their potential and unleash their potential, he is actually telling us how to get to the end of days. He's not describing what's going to happen on day 1, day 2, day 3, what's going to be the articles in the news, what's going to be the images that we see on the TV, who the big players are going to be. He's trying to transmit an important message, far more important than what it's actually going to look like. He's trying to transmit the message that for us to get to that point of the end of days, we are going to have to unite as one. And we see it very, very clearly in the verse if we're paying attention, right? The same verse that we saw again, Vayikra Yaakov el banav vayomer. Let's look at this verse with a new pair of eyes. Yaakov called his sons together and said, hey, asfu, gather together. When you bind yourselves together, that is the end of days. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like you have all gathered together. You have all united. And the Gemara therefore told us about his concerns. Maybe you're not going to be gathering together. Maybe there's something here that's blemished amongst this unit. And their answer is therefore wholly appropriate. They turn around and they say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem is one. There is unity. We understand it. We get the message. We know what you were worried about, but you don't need to worry. We understand that Hashem is the only thing that exists, that he is what we need to be focused on. We know what our mission is. We know where we need to get to. Echad is a fantastic word when we start to look at it in depth. And we've talked about some of these things before. But Echad is broken down in the following way. It's broken down as the letter Aleph, which is 1, the letter Chet, which has the numerical value of 8, and Daled, which has the numerical value of 4, and that is 13. 13, the 12 tribes with Yaakov in the center, or the 13 tribes, if you break out Ephraim and Manasseh and include the tribe of Levi, that is unity. That is all of the tribes being together, being united, understanding that Hashem is our God, Hashem is one. There's another famous 13, which we've also talked about before, and that is the Hebrew word ahava, which means love. And over there as well, we've got 4 letters with a numerical value of 13. Aleph, which is 1, Hey, which is 5, Bet, which is 2, Hey, which is 5. That gives us a total of 13, because the only way to achieve true unity is if there is love. There's another wonderful breakdown that we can see with this word, echad. We've got the number 8 from the Chet, which represents the 8 tribes born to Rachel and Leah. We've got the letter Daled, number 4, which represents the 4 tribes that are born to Bilhah and to Zilpah. And then we have the tribe of Levi, which is 1. All 13 tribes, echad. They're not just choosing a frum pasuk. They're not just trying to show off that they've been to a good Jewish school. They're trying to reinforce the understanding that to get to the end of days, we have to live in the reality of echad, that we have to understand who is at the center of everything, who is driving all of this forward, both in a personal way, like we've talked about, and in the bigger picture way, the Hanhagat HaYichud, all of history moving towards one, moving towards unity. And it takes a long process, right? We've talked about the 4 exiles that are going to challenge that unity throughout all of human history. And the 4 exiles, the letter Daled, gives us a little clue to the concept of moving away from the center point, because that's exactly what the Daled does. It is 2 completely opposite directions moving away from the center point. So with these 4 exiles, the world moves further and further away from unity. And we are all different, and we lose that sense of achdut, and we lose that sense of mission, and that goes through all of those 4 exiles. And if you remember the types of things that we talked about with the 4 exiles, the fact that they start with cultures and societies which are so opposed and so different to what we value as Jewish people, we didn't really assimilate into those cultures. But as it starts getting into the Greek culture, where we start to see the resonance with beauty and the impact that it has on our lives, already that starts to muddy the water a little bit. We start to get confused. We have Hellenists who start moving away from traditional Jewish values, because there is some truth in beauty, but it just has to be utilized in the right way. And it has to be channeled and directed into the right way. And we talked about how now we're in the 4th exile, the Galus Edom, the exile of Edom, of Esav, where we look and act exactly the same, and it becomes so much harder for us to see what we need to be doing differently and what we need to be resisting, because we literally feel like we're looking in the mirror, and yet the challenges of the exile move us further and further away from where we need to be, to the point that we can be in the year 2023 and we've never been as connected as we are today, and yet we've never been so disconnected. We have no idea who we are. We feel aimless and alone. The gullet of Edom, of Esav, is trying to pull us all apart. The amounts of divisions that exist within society, the amount of people who don't know who they are, the amount of people who slap on name after this, after that, trying to be able to piece together what their identity is comprised of. All of that just pulls us away from unity. It pulls us away from being one people. It pulls us away from respect and tolerance and peace. And so it's indicative of how we are going to keep moving further and further away until we show the world how to be together. That's what Yaakov is trying to teach them. And Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that's the lesson that we still need to learn. We are at the end of days, right? We are in this final chapter of human history. That's where we are up to. We have to be able to demonstrate as well that we understand. That's what the brothers were trying to communicate as well. They were trying to demonstrate that they understand that unity is what is required, that being together, that as one united whole, understanding that we are comprised of individuals with different roles, with different responsibilities, with different constructs, with different talents, with different skills. All of that is not supposed to drive us apart. It's supposed to bring us together. We're supposed to be able to fulfill our function and fulfill the function of humanity in a united and peaceful way. And once the brothers can express that they have learned that lesson, then we can bring the book of Bereshit to a close. We can reach the end of the book of Bereshit. And we've learned a lot together over these last 30 classes. But if all, we've talked about how we sift through the sands of time to get to Avraham, who embodied and represented Chesed. We then sifted to extract the psul of Yishmael and the negative side of Chesed from Yishmael. And we proceeded through to Yitzchak, who took up the reins, and he embodied and represented and injected into the spiritual bloodstream of the Jewish people the midah of Gevurah. We then further sifted and we produced Yaakov, which represents Tiferet, and we drew out of that process Esav, who brought out all of the negative sides of Gevurah. And then we now need to make sure that all of the building blocks, all the building stones of the future are able to work together, our 12 tribes. And then we can go forward to build the Bnei Yisrael. We can go into the book of Shemot, where we will see that we start to become a nation, where we start to become bigger than just these 12 tribes, where we get chosen by Hashem for really beautiful and great things. That's all yet to come. And please God, we should always have the clarity on who we are and why we are here. Please God, we should always be able to combat the noise that distracts us from accomplishing what we are here to accomplish. And please God, we should all be able to unify together and go forward together to the end of days. Amen va'amen. And at the end of a book, what do we say together? We say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek. Mazel tov, everybody. As I said, it's not the longest class, but it's a beautiful class, really wrapping things up and laying a lot of things to rest. And again, helping us to understand why the world looks the way it does, where it's all going. And that should empower us, because when we understand where it's all going, then we start to we start to be less surprised when we see the craziness unfolding in the world, because it's all just things which are coded and embedded in this wonderful, wonderful book, not just the whole lot, but specifically the book of Bereshit as well. It's been so wonderful being able to learn it with you. I've really enjoyed teaching it, and I know that at least some of you have enjoyed learning it as well. And I'm sure you've all got questions. And so we're going to end the recording there. And for anyone who wants to be able to join us on Zoom, no one ever joins us on Zoom. But if anyone does want to join us on Zoom, then come along, ask your questions. But to all those watching on, to millions watching on YouTube, we say chazak, 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 safe break, and we'll see you next time.